Want to know the worst kept secret in all of Warhammer? Orcs are going to be the big bad for 11th edition. In about 10 months, we're going to have a massive new discount box packed with boring blue space marines and beautiful green orcs. And I think they're going to replace a kit that everyone hates. My name's Nick, this is Miniature Death, and we're going to paint some big, brutal, and maybe bound for the bin. Currently, there's actually two Orc BOYZ kits for sale. The classic kit, which dates back to the early noughties, and the new one from 2021. So why do the new boys on the block get so much disdain? Well, for a start, they're monopose, with half the models using loadouts you don't really want. They're also push fit, which is both rubbish for beginners and unnecessary faff for experts, clipping off all these pegs. But the sculpts themselves are absolutely sick. Compared to the old twerking boys, I think it's a big improvement. And if I'm being honest, I think a lot of the hate is just because people don't like change. Still, the old BOYZ kit has a lot of charm, which is why I'm going to poach this classic top knot as an homage. Annoyingly, the new BOYZ kit has the head actually moulded into the shoulder, so I need to do some careful sawing and filing down before using some sprue goo to smooth everything together. There's a lot of obvious seams in the skin and shoulder pad which just look awful left unfilled. Another bad point for the new kit. I then cracked out some milliput to start filling in any larger gaps, and basically just used it to smush the new head, or I guess the old head, into place. I'm not the best sculptor, but I managed to get things looking fairly seamless, and then splooged on even more sprue goo to hide my sins. To finish building, I slapped on some of my usual texture paste on the base, and gave everything a quick zenithal prime. It's crazy how much larger the old heads are, even though the new bodies are much bigger overall. Maybe this is meant to be a knob head? Who knows? Oh, also, on a completely unrelated note, do you like my new tattoo? Let me know in the comments if you recognise where this little green skin is from. Wrong answers only. Now, I'm not Valrak. I have no idea for sure if either of these kits will be replaced, but I bet my freshly tattooed left arm that at least the 90s kit is going to get rid of. And with the recent introduction of Beast Snagger Boys, plus whatever mystery infantry is going to come in the new 11th edition box, the somewhat divisive 2021 boys might be bound for the bin. So, we best get painting it. I started off with a slightly unusual step for Orcs, and base coated all the skin with this deep, rich red through the airbrush. Why red? Well, I want to maintain a more natural, fleshy looking skin tone, even if it is going to be green. Then I applied a coat of Orc flesh directly from above, leaving all the red in the recesses. Immediately get this really stark contrast, even if it's not very realistic. Then another layer of moot green to brighten things up, just focusing on the highest areas, as well as any focal points, like the hands. And finally, a very fine highlight, mixing in a little Ushabti bone to bring things closer to normal skin tones. Then, an all-over wash of Athonian camo shade. I thinned this down quite a bit and directed it away from any upward-facing surfaces to preserve all my slightly sloppy airbrush work. Alright, skin done. Now I just need to paint the rest of the owl without going outside the lines. I started by blocking the trousers in with grey, because I wanted to keep the rest of the model fairly muted. Next, I painted all the leather straps using Rhinox hide, being extra careful here because we're so close to all that lovely green skin. Then, I used some Black Legion contrast for his boots, and to base his little slugger and stick bomb, ready for applying metallics later on. Now, I don't know if this boy belongs to a specific Orc clan, but we all know that the red ones go faster. So, I applied a coat of Flesh Tearer's red contrast on all the fabric, shoulder pads and loincloth. Then, to complement all that red, I painted his classic little top knot in Nazdreg yellow. Alright, almost done with all the base coats, the boring bit. Let's paint all the bone details with the Ushabti bone, this decorative skull and decorative tooth, and actual teeth that he uses in his actual gob for chewing. Then a quick base coat of bronze on the grenade head, plus his little earring and other jewellery, a heavy dry brush of silver on the slugger, and more silver on all the little clasps and things on his leather, as well as the spikes on his boots and shoulder pad. There we go, all blocked in. Wait, no, there's one thing I've missed. That big, nasty Gene Simmons tongue. Let's give it a nice coat of bright pink to finish off. I then gave pretty much everything except the skin a healthy wash of Agrax Earthshade to darken things down and tie it all together. Again, being super careful not to spill over onto the green. A little Seraphim Sepia on the skull to keep that a bit brighter, and a thinned down layer of that previous burnt red to re-establish the base. Now, I always do this, and you always hate it, and you always skip it, but I promise I'll be fast. While you wait for your wash to dry, scroll down, give us a like, and give us a subscribe. I'm sorry to be a blag, but I've got to do it. It's the law. If I don't, the government will come and kill me. Once everything is dry, our orc is looking suitably savage, but a little bit too dark and muted, so I cracked open the Mephiston Red to start highlighting. I'm really rubbish at edge highlighting, so I prefer to keep things sort of choppy and scratchy, as if it's all banged up instead of super neat. Just carefully outlining the shoulder pads and the loincloth, and even the wrist wraps where I was feeling brave. Then a slightly finer highlight of Troll Slayer Orange to make things pop. A few lines and scratches go a long way to selling the effect and add in a bit of weathering. Then I added some pallid witch flesh to the skull, just on the brow ridge and around the eye sockets. And as for the straps, some Bugman's Glow. This is quite a muted brown, and when it's thinned down quite a bit, you can add even more of those little scratches and lines, creating a sort of natural faux leathery texture, making stuff look proper battered, just like an orc's gear should. Then some very simple edge highlighting with the shoulder of the brush on his yellow hair plume to make that super punchy and bright, and some simple edge highlighting and dry brushing with Stormhost Silver on all the metallics. Simple. Alright, all that's left is that beautiful green skin. If I was a good painter, I would use glazing here, applying very thin layers, taking my time, getting a beautiful smooth gradient. But I'm not a good painter, so I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to do a sort of stippling highlight. I started with some super thinned down, pure moot green, and just sort of stab and dot it onto the most prominent muscles, working up bit by bit in several thin coats until it's suitably garish. I guess it kind of is like a glaze, except without the talent needed. And real skin is never very smooth anyway, it's usually all mottled and blemished, especially on an orc. Then repeat that same process covering a bit less area, with a little Ashabti bone added into the green, and then just working around the most prominent parts of his face with pure Ashabti bone to pick out the eyebrow ridges and eye sockets and whatnot. Last but not least, let's smush a little bit too much pigment powder into the base and around his boots, creating a nice dusty red vibe. And finish the whole thing off with a deep brown rim. So, do you hate the new BOYZ kit? Are you a die-hard fan of the 20-something old lads with all their retro charm? Or maybe you actually prefer the new BOYZ? I think they both look pretty great, especially when you get a bit creative. It's not that hard to start converting new chopper boys instead of slugger boys, and adding old heads or alternative heads to add a bit of goofy flair, or even mixing stuff up with the Beast Snagger or Commandos kits to make cool characters like this mech. Because to me, Orcs are one of those factions that are just made for kit bashing. Everything can be a bit rough around the edges, and it makes it look better. So I kind of hope this new BOYZ kit doesn't get replaced, whatever's coming down the line. My name's Nick, this is Miniature Death, don't forget to subscribe, and let's take a look at the final boy.